you. Thank you.
Yeah, we're bang on past. Yes, that's good. Thank you, Andrew. Good morning to everybody. Well, the hearings are now open as it's 9:30. So good morning and welcome to day 7 of the examination into the Mid Sussex Site Allocations DPD. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Mike Fox. I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination of the soundness of the plan. We are being recorded on YouTube, joy of joys. If people wish to introduce themselves, as I've said in earlier sessions, I'm not going around the table at the outset as you would sometimes do in a physical hearing, but when it's your turn to speak, then just say who you are and who you're representing. That would be helpful. What else do I need to say at this stage? Breaks. I do like my breaks. So we'll have one at about 11. We'll have a lunch break 1 to 2. And if we're still going by 3:30, then we'll have a further break. On the action notes, I wish to thank the council for their detailed response to 2 of the points, that's AP3 and AP4. And as I said before, I'm allowing responses to the council's comments from other parties. So if anybody wishes to respond to what the council has written in relation to AP3 and AP4, then I need your responses by the end of this week, close of play on the 18th of June. We've more or less finalised the site visits now. I'm sure they'll be on the website soon, and Charlotte will be able to help you on that. So matter 5 today, which is the local economy. We will be looking at all the allocations of employment land from policy S2 right through to policy S9. And then we'll be looking at policy SA34, which is on existing employment sites. I should have said SA2, of course, and SA9. So SA2 to SA9 and SA34. Right, are there any other comments, Charlotte, that you wish to draw my attention to?
Not at the moment, no.
Fine. And is there anything from the council, anything from the legal side, or anybody else from the council wishes to say anything before we start? Mr. Brown, anything?
No, sir, thank you very much.
Right. Well, that's enough prevarication. We'll get on. So 5.1, or matter 5, is are the policies to manage and promote the local economy and employment areas and allocations sound? And 5.1 states that policy SA9 allocates land for a new science and technology park to the north of the A2300. And I ask, is there a compelling economic case for the implementation of this scheme? The council state that the business park, or science and technology park, should I say, sorry, is one of the 4 aims of the DPD. It's the west of Burgess Hill, and it's in line with policy requirements of DP1. It was based on the Coast to Capital LAP Strategic Economic Plan. Its aim is to provide high GVA jobs in a location with a high skilled and educated workforce. It's next or adjacent to an allocation of 3,500 dwellings in the Northern Arc. So close proximity of homes to jobs. And the Burgess Hill Employment Site Study, document E3 in the examination library, concluded that the potential, the feasibility and the market for a science and technology park of this scale in this location. Also, as the council point out, there is a need to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and what better way to do it than a huge business park, a huge science technology park like this. Policy SA9 in the plan I'm looking into will provide greater certainty and significantly support economic growth and recovery within Mid-Sussex at a time when it's most urgently required. Then we come on to other parties, and Vale Williams for Decorah. They state there is a compelling and fundamentally sound economic case for the implementation of the Science and Technology Park with its proposed allocation in policy SA9. It's compliant with national policy. The plan sets a clear economic vision and strategy, which paragraph 81 in the NPPF exhorts you to do. That policy DP1 is an aspirational allocation for a science and technology park in a broad location. And what policy SA9 does is allocate this in a defined location. It's also supported by the Chilmark Burgess Hill Employment Site Study, which I just mentioned, the document E3. This document concluded there was a need, potential, feasibility and market demand for a STP, Science Technology Park, of this scale in this location. So DP9 relates to the strategic employment allocation of 25 hectares. That's a different site altogether. And the rationale for the STP in policy SA9 was, as I said, identified by the Coastal Capital LEP. Also, apparently a void of alternative suitable sites, and that's within the southeast in general, I understand, and that there are no other strategic employment locations of the nature and type that's before us here that will compete with or provide an alternative to the STP. So it's for a kind of specialist type of uses, if you like, and not just for any kind of industry. And I suppose one of my questions is how certain can we be that the Science and Technology Park will not be developed for other uses, be it, for example, warehousing or even for residential, if the economy performs less well than anticipated? So that's a general question I would like us to discuss. I think what I'm going to do is go through all of 5.1 and then we'll have a general discussion rather than break it down too much. So I ask in Little Romans 2 about the changed location of the proposed Science and Technology Park from the south to the north of the A2300 and why. And the council basically done more work in refining this. And they also draw my attention within their response to my Little 2 between the large Science Technology Park and a smaller 25 hectares of employment allocation in two elements, which is broken down to 15 hectares at the hub and 10 hectares in the Northern Arc strategic development. So that's a bit of helpful clarification there. Vale Williams under Romans 2, that the Science Technology Park is promoted by Project Newton and compliant with NPPF 35. Coming on to my Little Romans 3, I ask you, is the recent economic downturn in the Crawley Gatwick area a strong argument for proceeding more cautiously rather than going for this huge allocation? And the council's view, excuse me, the council's view is there's no clear evidence that any economic downturn in this area will be sustained in the medium term, and therefore this allocation is important. But its key sectors include life sciences, digital and creative industries, clean energy, fintech, and defence and security. That the infrastructure is needed to stimulate economic growth and recovery in Burgess Hill and throughout the district and beyond. that the current economic downturn is short term, and that Vale Williams, the critical mass and scale of this park is a regional aspiration of the district plan. Little Roman numerals 4 are the impacts of an enlarged science and technology park on the physical infrastructure justified. And the answer is quite a detailed one from the council, and they look at drainage and flood relief, they look at gas network, which in fact is not quite for the past, but not the way we're going to be looking in the future. They talk about sustainable energy principles. And so my second question, out of interest more than anything else, what will be the main sources of energy for the new Science and Technology Park? I'd like to know that. Little Romans 5 is the impact on the highways network. And the council's response to that is that extensive work has been undertaken to ensure the full effects of transport impacts are understood. They point out 2 junctions are being forecast to be severe, primarily linked to the Science and Technology Park. The first being the A23/A2300 southbound on slip at Burgess Hill, or near Burgess Hill. And secondly, the A27/B2036 at Anstey, and also the A23, which I have seen with my eyes, being widened southbound to 3 lanes from the A2300 to the B2118. And that the model demonstrates there is an in-principle mitigation solution to address the impacts of the Science and Technology Park. I talk about modal shift then, but I gather we're going to come on to that in a minute, so I'm not going to pre-raise that. I suppose my third question in relation to its general location is it's on the opposite side of the town to the railway. And I just wonder how we're going to encourage greater links to the main railway line at Burgess Hill. Vale Williams, that the SA9 site does not enlarge the STP allocation already approved under DP policy DP1. So the size of it's, if you like, already given within the district plan. And the mitigation package on transport or infrastructure in general, primarily on transport, has been agreed with the principal parties, the Highways England, County Highways and the District Council. And there is a mobility strategy to prioritise sustainable travel options with a phased package of physical measures to mitigate the residual traffic impact by improving capacity at key junctions at the point that the STP build out is required. And this work demonstrates that the STP mitigation package is deliverable, that the junctions will operate within capacity, and the residual traffic impact will not be severe. Little Roman 6 talks about sustainable transport and how are we going to get away from heavy car dependency. Council's view is, or its comments back to me are, the mobility strategy aims to achieve an overall modal shift of 10%. And that Burgess Hill itself within the town aims to achieve a modal shift of 15%. There'll be a lot of pedestrian cycle connectivity between the Northern Arc and Burgess Hill, and links with they say links with trains and buses. Again, I'd like to explore that. Another question from me is regarding the place and connectivity programme for Burgess Hill. Policies SA12 and SA13 do not appear as priority locations. Is this because they're below the critical mass, or is the local network unable to take any further sustainable transport improvements in this area? The Strategic Transport Assessments, document T7, only assumes a 3% shift away from the car in relation to the Science and Technology Park. The mobility strategy, which includes effective demand management options coupled with employee incentives, has demonstrated a target of 50% modal shift from in relation to the Science and Technology Park as being realistic. So I've got different figures here, and maybe my understanding could be improved as to what the modal shift is going to be. Vale Williams states some interesting statistics here, which do sound impressive. They say that 1,300 homes out of the 3,500 will be within a 2-kilometre walk of the site. There'll be new pedestrian and cycle links on the A2300 connecting the Northern Arc, Burgess Hill, the neighbouring hub and Bolney Grange Business Park. That the local population, which will be between 40 and 50,000, will be within cycling distance. That the number 100 bus service passes adjacent to the site on the A2300. So there's strong potential for bus services to permeate the STP via the proposed super hub within the site. And they're talking about a 10% overall modal shift. Now, this is what Vale Williams is saying. And that equates to a 29% reduction from the total STP peak hour trips. And my next question is, what exactly is meant by an enhanced bus service permeating the Science and Technology Park? Or is this just an idea? And has any thought been given to new technology such as guided bus paths? I examined the Swindon plan about 4 years ago, and they were very much into guided bus paths there. So I know there's at least one other place in the country that's thinking of this. Little Roman 7 is all about significant environmental impacts and can they be mitigated? And the council have done thorough work against 19 employment-related criteria. They say that the chosen location to the north of the A2300 scored higher in relation to aspects such as flood risk, ancient woodlands, and highways, with 40% of the area to be retained as green space, and no significant environmental impacts associated with the proposals that cannot be satisfactorily mitigated. Vale Williams referred to the Project Newton, so it does not have any significant environmental impacts. They refer me to the Sistra modelling. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about this today. And a statement of common ground that's been signed, which is document SA 9.10, with an update SA 9.17, which confirm that the highway's impact would not be significant, subject to the necessary mitigation. That landscaping impacts, visual impacts have been adequately considered and assessed. That all development is anticipated at 4 stories or under. That the sustainability statement ensures that adaptation, mitigation, water and energy efficiencies are maximised. That ecological factors and mitigation have been considered under the ecological appraisal, which is SA 9.13. And that all the factors that are identified in that appraisal can be achieved on the site and its surrounds. That flooding and development in the floodplain has been adequately considered. That the policy is justified and policy compliant. That it can provide in excess of 100,000 square metres floor space. And that possibly most importantly, that the Science and Technology Park will provide a catalyst for change in the region. So it's not just the district that's relying on this. What Vale Williams are saying is that the region is relying on this, and it's something which has got an impact way beyond the boundaries of of Mid Sussex. To Romans 8, is this amount of development excessive in one location? Is it sustainable? Council set's already been established, and obviously DP1 has been through this and has already been found to be sound. The critical mass is required. The SA9 will make sufficient provision for ancillary uses, such as, and they give a few examples like hotel, creche, cafe, convenience stores, as long as these are ancillary to the main purpose of employment or the kind of employment that is associated with the Science and Technology Park. And that there are going to be these 5 phases, and these will enable the market to be tested and respond to at each stage in the phasing. Vale Williams say that this park, Science and Technology Park, can only be developed in one cohesive location to ensure critical mass and a regional function. And I'll mention the other points, I think, in there. A single location also supported by the Litchfields EGA, page 92. A lot of talk on critical mass. Another question from me. I wonder if anybody can elaborate on what is meant by critical mass and why, in this case, it needs to be 50 hectares. It does seem a lot to me, but I accept it's already been through DP1. But I would like to, if anybody can help me out on what is meant by critical mass. And then 9, for Romans 9, is implications for the new use class E, commercial business and services. The council, as other councils have drawn my attention to in the last few months, have said there are unintended consequences to this. It becomes difficult to plan for sufficient office space, and it's now part of Class E, which covers a wide range of uses. In the case of policy SA9, uses must fall within the definition of a science park set out in the policy. I think that's something we might want to discuss. And that storage and distribution would not be supported. The Terence O'Rourke to St. Modwans support the modification M01 to remove references to B1, B8 uses in policy SA4 and to rely on just the use descriptions, business lighting, industrial storage and distribution. This avoids issues that may be associated with reference to new Class E, which will allow for a wider range of uses, as we just heard, such as retail, and give scope for permitted development rights to change to other Class E uses without planning permission. The site is more likely to be used for B8. There's a cheap advert coming up. I'm examining the Lambeth plan at the moment, and I asked them to look at the implications of Class E, and they've written a kind of mini thesis on it. So if anybody wants to look at the implications of Class C or development in general, I commend what Lambeth did. I think it's an excellent piece of work, but I'll say no more about Lambeth. Terence O'Rourke, I've just done, sorry. Vale Williams, we do not believe that there are any significant implications for new Class C that reduce the effectiveness of SA9 and that cannot be addressed through joint working at a detailed planning application stage. And they go through what Class C means, but I think we all know that. And the master plan, as they say, was prepared before Class C was introduced. But DP1 does make clear that Science Park Association definition of a science park through the Science Park Association does restrict uses that are not class specific or use class specific, and the new revised phase 1 layout results from highways mitigation works and alterations to the entrance roundabout with a small loss of 21,000 square foot floor space. But this has nothing to do with use E. And my final question for Romans 10 on 5.1 is about the impact of COVID-19 on the local economy. How significant is it? Is there a case for changing anything? The council say the overall impact isn't yet known. Perhaps a bit of an unfair question in some ways, but a few of you have given me interesting answers nonetheless. The council say the planned period to 2031 will allow time for recovery. We hope the allocation of employment sites will contribute towards economic recovery and growth. Given the above factors and the relative resilience of the Mid-Sussex economy, the council is confident that no amendments are required to policies SA2 to SA9 as a result of COVID-19. Terence O'Rourke state the market fundamentals pre-COVID-19 for Gatwick and Crawley were strong. Despite Brexit and COVID-19, the report concludes that the market for new industrial floor space in this location will be resilient. A JLL market update points to a properly functioning market, demonstrating that despite the short-term impact of COVID-19, the market fundamentals for industrial and warehouse property for Gatwick and Crawley remain strong. And finally, Vale Williams, that the R&D, manufacturing and assembly sectors are largely unaffected, and that B8 has actually benefited from COVID with less resilience on high street retail and more internet purchases. The office sector is less sure, however, of how much space will be needed. Office take-up over the last year has been low, although home working is not seen as ideal by many, with loss of personal interaction and what they refer to interestingly as Zoom fatigue. A more balanced, hybrid, agile working practice is developing across many industries. We therefore do not consider that the short-term impact of COVID on the local economy will be significant, especially, or the impact, should I say, especially over the short to medium term, and the pandemic does not justify any change to policy SA9. Thank you for bearing with me. That was quite a long spiel from me. So it's a whole of 5-1. I have asked a few questions of my own, which you're aware of. I wonder if, Paul Brown, do you want to sort of set this one going for us?
Hello, sir. So firstly, I'm grateful for the summary of the council's position, and I'm not going to go back over things that we've already set out in answer. I think one of the things that is noticeable about your summary, which is not just of our position, but of the other participants today, and what is quite extraordinary given the scale of the proposal that we're looking at, is the absence of anybody actually objecting to what is being proposed. In essence, people who are here today are all supporting. I know Mr. North, a little later on, is patiently biding his time to say something about SA34, but I don't understand him to have any issue with the science part. So for that reason, sir, I'm not going to go over things that we've already set out. What I'd like to do between me and Mr. Marsh is just to pick up on some of your questions, because I think the main purpose really today is to satisfy you on some of the not so much concerns, but the questions that you've raised. So the only thing that I want to deal with in that regard, and it's just a point of clarification or stroke correction. I noticed when you summarised the council's position on 5.1 Roman 2, is the changed location of the proposed science and technology park from the south of the A2300 to the north justified? You said that, or indicated that the council had said that that was because further or more detailed work had been done. So I think if you go back and look at both our representations on this main matter, but also our response to your earlier questions, it's not quite right. And there is actually a really important point here that we need to make absolutely clear. When you refer in Roman 2 to a location south of the A2300 in DP9, one can see, if one looks at DP9, exactly where that comes from. It's in the overall strategic allocation. And there is a reference there to 25 hectares of land for use as a high quality business park south of the A2300 served by public transport. So, and I think that's where the reference to south of the A2300 comes from. But it's really important to understand that that is a different concept to the science and technology park. And if one goes back to DP1, you can see very clearly that it is a different concept. At DP1, Sustainable Economic Development, that the second of the main points, provision of new employment land and premises will be made by, and the first item there is allocating 25 hectares of land as a high quality business park at Burgess Hill to the east of Cookfield Road. Now, so that 25 hectares as a high quality business park, that is what policy DP9 does. However, if you go on in DP1, you will see the next, and it's a separate and freestanding element, is the development of a science and technology park to provide high quality employment for the wider area, and a reference there to a broad location to the west of Burgess Hill indicated on the policies map. And so it's quite clear if one looks at DP1 that there are two different things: a 25 hectare high quality business park and a science and technology park. So the science and technology park has never been shown as south of the A2300. The broad location that's identified is in essence where the allocation now is. It's a broad location, so it's not precise, but it's quite clearly to the north. And so as you'll have seen from our actual answer to your question for the main matter statement, we say the location of the Science and Technology Park has not changed, was never located to the south of the A2300. It is true there's been more detailed work in defining the boundary of the Science and Technology Park, but that hasn't resulted in a change in its location. And that's actually quite a fundamental point in terms of this being a daughter document that fits in with the strategy set out in the district plan. So I hope that is helpful. That's what I wanted to say. And
that was very helpful, and I'm suitably chastised. Thank you.
No, of course. I mean, I apologise if I've laboured the point, but
no, it's fine. It's fine. It's a very important point to labour.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to pass over to Mr. Marsh to pick up on some of your specific questions. And so if there are some there that we can't answer, I'm sure other participants will be able to chip in and help plug the gaps as well. But I'll turn to Mr. Marsh.
Good morning, Mr. Marsh.
Morning, thank you, sir. Just to deal with a couple of these, some of them are, as Mr. Brown says, are site specific, and we can go so far, but I'm sure the promoter who is on the line will be able to assist us with those. I think it's really important on your first question about the types of uses and potential. I think you described to flip to other uses. I think it's just important to set out that this is a really important part of Mid Sussex District Council's economic development strategy, recovery and growth for COVID. So I think from our perspective, we are fully supportive of a science tech park of this nature in this location of this scale, because of the benefits to Mid Sussex and the wider benefit that it brings. So just to sort of set that out and what our attitude would be to other uses on this site that you mentioned. And that's reflected, I think, in the policy SA9 in terms of the proposals demonstrating that they form within the definition of a science and technology park. We set that out, and the proposals in use class B8 storage and distribution will not be supported. So that sets the policy position on the types of uses that we are looking at on this site. I think also second to set out is our very close working relationship with the site promoters. It's been over a number of years on the evidence base supporting this work, particularly on the transport, which I'm sure we'll come on to, and has led to the two statements of common ground, one on transport and one on planning matters that you referred to in your opening. And that gives us the confidence between us and the promoters that this is being delivered as a science and technology park in this location, and that we are looking at early discussions on PPA to get this off the ground, because again, we're aware that the promoters want to move ahead with this quickly. And on that basis, we'll be looking at, through the planning process, potentially options around conditions on certain uses in relation to individual phases and the like, which should help secure the various uses that we're looking at in the policy within the definition of a tech park. That's what we're all working towards the same goal on that. I'm sure the promoters will be able to come in on that one. In terms of, I think it's your third question, opposite side of the town to the railway line. There are two things to note here. And again, promoters will be able to help us with the mobility strategy work, which looks at 10% modal shift. That includes extending existing bus lanes, bus routes, extending and improving, particularly, as you mentioned, the proximity to the Northern Arc and the potential that that's got, which takes us all the way from one side of the town centre and station to the other. There's also the mobility strategy to work on shuttling between Burgess Hill Station and the site. I think very difficult for any authority to find a site of this importance and scale anywhere closer than a sustainable town centre. But not only has Burgess Hill Station, but Wivelsfield Station to the north, which takes you on the link to the Eastbourne line. Burgess Hill Station is London to Brighton and then onwards to the coast. And Wivelsfield takes you down to Eastbourne and beyond. So very important for the two stations. And there are a couple of things linked with that. One of them we'll be looking at tomorrow, I'm sure, about safeguarding improvements at Wivelsfield Station and some, which is SA36 from memory, and SA37, which is the multifunctional network. And that links to the place and connectivity project, which we reference in our matter statement. And you'll see there on figure 3, which comes in just after para 1.57, that the numerous proposed walking and cycling improvements in different phases across the town, of which I'm led to believe are more than 50% complete. So not just planned, but actually complete. Work is happening on the ground. And that takes you, provides some attractive and usable walking and cycling routes right across the town of Burgess Hill, linking in with the Northern Arc and out beyond to the Tech Park. And I think then that leads us on to, I think, your question 4, which was talking about link between place and connectivity and SA 12 and 13, not priority locations, but you can see there from figure 3 that the whole of Folders Lane existing has a proposed walking and cycling improvement phase 2, and you'll know from your site visit when you go out again next week that is in a remarkably sustainable location, existing footpaths and routes into the town centre and the train station. So it's not marked on as a priority. The priorities are with the business estate and Northern Arc as developments at that time, but obviously the whole place and connectivity programme, as I said, underway, mostly complete, is for the whole town of Burgess Hill, from east to west, north to south. So that should hopefully assist you and give you some confidence, especially in the mobility work, that the site promoters might have some more information on for you, and the importance of tying up that project and the Tech Park project and other developments in Burgess Hill, as we mentioned last week, giving them all sustainable routes around the town, linking housing and employment. That's the only ones I can help you with straight away. We can obviously come back if there's any further queries.
That's helpful. Can you help me a bit further on the railway aspect? Has there been any discussion with the train operating companies about sort of improving these links across?
And that's something you'd have to speak to the promoters to know more of the detail. But obviously we're in discussions with Network Rail. There is the safeguarding land at Wivelsfield for improvements there, accessibility improvements to Wivelsfield Station. There is some, I guess, a neighbourhood plan allocation for looking at regeneration at Burgess Hill Station, which we're actively working on to improve accessibility to the stations.
Thank you very much. That's helpful and detailed. Right. Do any of the other parties wish to come in now? Graham Keane, QC, welcome to us.
Good morning, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Can indeed, yes.
Thank you. Good to see you again. I'm Graham Keane, Queen's Counsel. So as I said on the first day, but it's been a while, I'm here on behalf of, instructed by Decora Southern Limited and Wortleford Trading Co. Limited, instructed by Vale Williams. And I won't ask them to put themselves on screen now, but with me today, I've got three people who I hope can help with the detail of the points that you've raised this morning and otherwise. I've got Suzanne Holloway from Vale Williams, who'll deal with planning matters generally. I've got Mr. Andrew Osborne, also from Vale Williams, who will deal with economic and commercial aspects of the topic this morning. And then I have Mr. Tim Britton from Connect, who will deal with highways, transportation matters. And obviously, say you've raised a few questions there, which I can get Mr. Britton to come back to in due course. So I wonder if you'd be happy for me to try and structure it this way, because you went through all 10 of your specific STP questions in summary form, covering a lot of ground, very helpfully, thank you, and have then raised some additional questions. And so just to make sure that we cover the territory, what I was proposing to do, subject to you being happy for me to deal with it like this, was to take the questions in chunks, as it were. So for example, deal with your Roman 1, Roman 2, and then move on to some of the others, so that we cover the ground and also pick up during the course of that the questions that you've raised additionally this morning. So if that's acceptable, I'd just say make a few points by way of context in relation to your questions 1 and 2, and then I'll ask the various people with me today to deal with specific points that have been raised in relation to their expertise. Would that assist, sir?
Absolutely fine.
Thank you. So in relation to the first point, which is compelling economic case, is there a compelling economic case for the implementation of the STP? As you very helpfully summarised already, it's Vale Williams and my client's case that not only is there a compelling economic case, but it's a fundamentally sound one too. And just to draw some threads out of that, it's a long-standing regional aspiration for an STP, and that's something that is supported by a robust evidence base. And you've lit upon the main documents already, but the North West Sussex Economic Growth Assessment, document E1, which was updated in September of last year, that's document E2, and of course the Burgess Hill Employment Site Strategy, which, as I think you mentioned, includes, and I concluded rather, that there was a need and demand for an STP, a science and technology park of this scale and in this location. And so that is in itself underpinned, the rationale for an STP in this location, underpinned by its identification back in 2014 in the Coast Capital LEP, in their economic plan, which recognised the positive impact that an STP could have on this location, this area, but also the wider region to support high-end economic growth. And so just to take a couple of other brief points that underpin this, the district plan examination obviously assessed and considered that compelling economic case and concluded that it complied with the framework, paragraph 35 obviously in particular. We know that Mid Sussex has committed to the delivery of the STP in their corporate economic delivery strategy of 2018. And so the allocation in SA9 can provide the necessary critical mass and fill a gap in provision in the southeast. Now, so critical mass, you've asked a specific question about. We've got a 43 hectare site. I've got Ms. Holloway and Mr. Osborne, who are going to follow me briefly, and they'll give a bit more chapter and verse on why we need this scale of development to constitute critical mass. But it's clear common ground between us and the council that critical mass for this sort of project is crucial. And then gap in provision in the southeast, again, that's a matter that Mr. Osborne can give you a bit more detail on. So I won't seek to steal his thunder or repeat matters. The compelling and fundamentally sound economic case that was clear from DP1 remains unchanged, and importantly, it's a case that has been updated through Mid Sussex's evidence base supporting this allocation, and of course my clients' detailed evidence on a whole host of matters, but particularly for this topic, this question, market demand, target occupiers, the market testing that's been done, which demonstrates that the allocation complies with not just the big question for you, sir, framework para 35, but also importantly in this context, framework paragraphs 81 and 82, because we're told, aren't we, that local authorities are to set out a clear economic vision and strategy to positively and proactively encourage sustainable economic growth. Well, that's absolutely what this allocation is seeking to do. And 82, which is to address the specific locational requirements of different sectors, including provision for clusters and networks, and particularly of knowledge and data-driven businesses. Again, that absolutely, that objective and that ambition absolutely met by this allocation. So summary on the first point from me, SA9 is a golden and sustainable opportunity for not just the district, but the region. If I can move on to your second question, sir, and I just want to take this relatively shortly before I ask the others to come in and pick up on specifics. There are two things I'd like to deal with under your Roman 2, sir. The first is simply on the first point about change location, can I absolutely endorse what Mr. Brown has just said to you about there being no change in location and the different role that DP1 and DP9 seek to undertake. So you have those two allocations in DP1, firstly for an science and technology park, secondly for 25 hectares of employment land, and DP9 deals with the employment land in more detail. But you have an STP referred to in the development plan as a broad location to the west of Burgess Hill. That broad location has been assessed during the evolution of the development plan, now the DPD. And we have a situation, and again, I absolutely endorse what Mr. Brown has said, very notably so, my submission for an allocation of this scale and scope, that there is a complete, almost complete, I better caveat that, absence of objection. I'll come back to that in a little more detail. But we know that the Regulation 19 process confirmed Mid Sussex's assessment that the northern site is the preferred location. And so just to say that the only other site that had been put forward at the Reg 18 stage, which, as you know, also west of Burgess Hill, but to the south of the A2300, assessed by, both of them assessed by Mid Sussex District Council in considerable detail, that other sites are not progressed on the Regulation 18 stage. So not only is it Mid Sussex's assessment that the SA9 allocation is the preferred site, there isn't an alternative promoted, and there are no objections to the suitability and sustainability of the STP site from, firstly, any statutory consultee, and secondly, the promoter of that site to the south of the A2300. So this is the only deliverable opportunity. Now, so I did say that it wasn't a complete absence of objection, because you'll see that the Amtico group takes some points against the policy, as does Bolney Parish Council in relation to some highways impacts. And I'll ask Mrs. Holloway and Mr. Britton just to pick up on those points insofar as we need to deal with them this morning. But so we have a policy in SA9, an allocation in SA9 that is complementary to and doesn't undermine or supersede policy DP9 because of the different roles that they perform. So those are my initial thoughts on those first two questions. If I can invite Mrs. Holloway first and then Mr. Osborne before we just deal with some particular points, and then we'll move on to your other questions, if that's acceptable.
It's fine.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. My name is Suzanne Holloway. I'm a partner at Vale Williams, representing Decorum Waterford Trading Company. Just if I may, hopefully you can hear me okay, sir, but just to add a little to Mr. Keane, Mr. Brown and Mr. Marsh's comments. As you'll be aware, we've been working with Mid Sussex on this very positively since 2017 with the call for sites. Mr. Keane makes the point that we are the only site, but I think it's important also to consider that we are the only site in the region. And therefore, we've been working behind the scenes with both the Coastal Capital very closely in terms of the opportunities for the wider region, particularly, sir, in your comments regarding COVID-19 and the pandemic, but also that we are looking at this particular long-term strategy up to 2031. And in addition, we're working very closely with Mid Sussex District Council, both in their policy team in regard to the site allocations DPD, but also with the development management team. And I believe Mr. Marsh commented, we've actually got a draft planning performance agreement that's in front of Mid Sussex at the moment. So, sir, your question, is there a compelling economic case, but also the question asks about implementation. And I just think it's important to make the point that our clients are ready and wanting to deliver this site and are making all best endeavours to get to the delivery and the formal planning application as soon as possible. So hopefully that helps, sir, in terms of, is there a need, but also is there intent and deliverability in terms of our site.
Thank you very much for that. How quickly do you think your clients would get given a free run of everything? How quickly would they actually want to be on site? When will the first bit of turf be?
Well, we've asked that phase one be delivered for in 2 years' time, but basically that allowing us possibly 18 months to progress. But we have indicated with Mid Sussex that we're wanting to have our first pre-application post your inspector's report, sir, should we be acceptable that we're allocated. So we are literally all guns like blazing to put in and start the pre-application process with Mid Sussex.
Fine.
I think
so I'm the barrier, obviously, then.
I hope so as well. You'll understand that Mr. Keen's comments regarding the extensive and robust evidence base, we are working very quickly to demonstrate in terms of the proportionality of the evidence that we've already got. There's a significant amount of work, a very large project team, and we're looking very closely at all of those kind of if, buts and maybe so that we can progress to an outline and a hybrid as soon as possible.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully that helps. I imagine Mr. Keen would like me to pass to Mr. Osborne just to discuss in terms of critical mass.
That would be helpful as well. Mr. Osborne, do come in.
Bear with me. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay.
Very impressive map you have behind you.
In our office. So I'm Andrew Osborne. I'm development partner at Vale Williams, and I'm representing the Science and Technology Park, Decora Southern Limited, and Waterford Trading Company. I'd like to pick up on 2, possibly 3 points, if I may, sir, that you've raised. Suzanne Holloway just mentioned the gap in provision, and in our response to 511, we did a very kind of simple exercise where we just looked at Google Maps for Science Park in our region, and it's very clear that the closest provision, which is significantly established with not a lot of available space, is Surrey Research Park in Guildford, the Kent Science Park, and the Southampton Science Park. So there is really no science and technology specific provision in the region that you can see behind me. I would like to just briefly mention that on that map that we included in our evidence, there was reference to a Science Park Road in Brighton. That's just Google picking up on a road name in Brighton. There is no Science Park in Brighton.
Okay, thank you.
So first, lack of provision. The second point linking to that provision is there's no sites of real scale in the region. There's plenty of employment sites above around 5 hectares, but most have a B8 focus. None have a specific science and technology park focus. So hopefully that sort of covers the gap. I think it's worth trying to also answer the critical mass point, if I may. We've spent a lot of time looking at the concept with Decora and Waterford in terms of where demand lies and making sure we have that right. They're very experienced developers. They're developing the hub opposite. That's 500,000 square feet. And our view from a market perspective is critical mass means you have a cluster of businesses locating on a park. It's a range of building types. It's a range of differing business uses. You have the scale and the economies to deal with enabling works and infrastructure, and provide the ancillary accommodation that's necessary on a park of this scale, incubation units, which on their own usually aren't viable. And importantly, you've got the scale to be able to accommodate the big innovation-led occupiers that historically have taken space in our region, the wider region, not just in Mid-Sussex, but the Gatwick Diamond. And those, are of 100,000 square feet plus typically. If we look historically at businesses like Electa that are in oncology medical research, L3, which is aviation, manufacturing, flight simulators, and others. So those occupiers have limited options, and we are still seeing demand from manufacturers. In fact, Terence O'Rourke evidence, the JLL report mentioned a manufacturing requirement from a Croydon-based company looking for space at their scheme, and we are in early discussions with somebody else that's looking for a significant amount of space. But of course, without an allocation, we don't have anything deliverable. So we're seeing demand too. So hopefully that addresses the critical mass question, sir.
Just on that, I'm not asking you to give me the name of the manufacturer, but do you know the broad ballpark estimate of employment that would bring?
Well, that in terms of JLL, sir, or our discussions?
The one that you just said, the demand for the manufacturer who wishes
Yeah,
to move
okay. So,
from Croydon.
I'm just finding it, in the Terence O'Rourke evidence-based, JLL referred to,
What's in there, is it?
in point 10, sir, they referred to us in Modwin as being in discussion with a manufacturing company seeking 80 to 100,000 square feet. So that's point 10, which suggests there's still demand from businesses seeking accommodation. Whilst we have observed a slowdown due to COVID, we're still seeing manufacturing type companies continuing and demand there. Separately, we've had an agent-led requirement from a large occupier exploring options for a large amount of space in region, not necessarily focusing on the science technology part, but they would if it had an allocation and we had the ability to provide a building in time.
So you haven't got an exact figure of unemployment then, but you got the figure for the.
I only have the quantum of space, sir. I don't know how many jobs.
That's fine. It's fine. It was a slightly unreasonable question, but thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to say, or do we go back? I've got a big one.
I think that's everything. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Right, Mr. Keane, is Peter Lever part of your team?
Sir, he isn't. I think he's here. Sorry, I got a bit of feedback going on. But no, I think he's here for Terence O'Rourke this morning. But I may be wrong. I'm sure he'll tell me if I am.
I'm just wondering whether I bring him in now if it's on matters 1 and 2, and then I come straight back to you again. So, Peter Lever.
I think Miss Holloway also may have her hand up again. But
right, let's have Peter Lever first, and then Suzanne Holloway. Peter Lever.
Oh, so yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, good. Yeah. Sorry, Peter Lever for JLL. We're acting for St Modwin. It's really just to, with regard to the reference to the manufacturer from Croydon, who had a requirement between 80,000 and 100,000 square feet. Unfortunately, I don't know how many people they're looking to employ. We just haven't got that information. All we do know is the size or the scale of their actual inquiry.
Well, thank you for being honest, both of you, on that. It's just interesting. It would have been an interesting thing to have added into the mix to have known what the size of the employment was, but don't worry. So, okay. Is there anything else on that, or is that your one point?
No, it's just really so just to sort of put a full stop to that point.
Thank you for that. Okay, thank you for that. Suzanne Holloway, do come back.
Apologies, sir. My raising hand function is not playing very well this morning, so bear with me.
You're all right.
I just wanted to just pick up from Mr. Osborne's comments. Actually, in one of our MIQs that we're responding, we've actually put in the Science Park branding. We just thought it might be helpful to identify, going back to our point in terms of deliverability, marketability, and testing the market. So on day 1 and 2, so we talked about the strong confidence in the local market, particularly residential, but we also picked up in terms of employment space. And it was just really another indicator of the information that you have in front of you, sir, about how well established and developed the Project Newton Science Park brand is.
You mentioned all the positive sides between you. Is there anything in this area within this diamond, or however you want to describe this area, which is in fact a weakness that needs to be overcome, or is it all plus plus plus?
In terms of the weakness of the commercial market, sir?
In terms of this as an area, it's the geography of this area, is there anything about it that's unattractive to bringing business in?
I wouldn't believe so, but being part of Vale Williams and a leading market agent, so that's probably the stock answer. I think what's important to know, if you'll see that none of the Mr. Osborne's comments, there are no other strategic employment locations, but no other local planning authorities in their local plan review are also indicating that they have other strategic employment locations of this nature and scale. So if there was a negative, sir, it's the fact that land supply is restricted, obviously by Brighton and Hove, being that they have the sea to one side, obviously the countryside, other policy constraints, and then obviously Gatwick with the safeguarding. So there is a land supply issue, but I'm not sure that directly answers your question, sir.
It's an interesting point you mentioned. There's no direct competitors within this area, and you mentioned Southampton, Kent, and Guildford as being the kind of nearest points.
Yes.
So within that area, the stage is set for this proposal, presumably.
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, thank you for all of that. I think it's back to Mr. Keane then to carry on with ploughing through my points, Mr. Keane.
Thank you, sir. I think some of them we can take more shortly than those first two, but your Roman 3 about whether the economic downturn in the Crawley-Gatwick area is a strong argument for proceeding more cautiously with a smaller scheme, to which you'll know that my clients say no. It's our firm belief, sir, that there's strong evidential justification for the proposed critical mass and scale of the STP, and that will act as a catalyst for economic growth and change. So it may give you some comfort, apart from me saying that my clients are sure this is a scheme that's deliverable as per the indicative phasing, to respond to market needs and to provide the necessary infrastructure at the appropriate points. But also the economic growth assessment update of September of 2020, carried out by the District Council, E2, confirms the continued importance of the Mid-Sussex area, and that's Burgess Hill in particular, forming part of a well-functioning economic area in which the market has confidence, is their assessment. And so this is a highly sustainable and accessible location, and so importantly, you can have confidence because the STP team, as Ms. Holloway has already indicated, has significant expert delivery experience. We've got 2 committed landowners jointly promoting the site with relevant, sizable experience. As Mr. Osborne said a few moments ago, Decora are at the moment developing a very impressive hub across the other side of the A2300, which you'll have seen, sir. And so this is a matter that has been continually assessed. So the role and function of the STP in these evolving economic circumstances has been continually assessed. And the clear conclusion is common ground again with the council is that this is deliverable on the basis of the phasing as we've indicated. So I'll ask I know Mr. Osborne wants to say something on this particular point, the Crawley-Gatwick area point. And if I can turn to him next.
Yes. Mr. Osborne.
Can you hear me, sir?
I can.
The Gatwick Crawley market, there's no doubt it has been affected, slowed down due to COVID. But actually the employment market is actually very dynamic. The market doesn't just depend on aviation. It's a diverse industry base there with medical, defence, training, manufacturing companies and distributors too. And in fact, Gatwick is seeing record land values at the moment. Sites have come onto the market and the majority have all been bought by developers for speculative B8 development, which is being fueled by Amazon and the third-party logistic companies. So it is a strong market, but it is providing a particular sort of offer, largely B8-led schemes. I think the other thing that relates to the Gatwick Crawley market is there are those diverse businesses that, if they're not looking for B8 space but need manufacturing or office or R&D type facilities, they will have limited options going forward. And that is what the Science and Technology Park will be able to offer. And in our supporting positioning document, which we submitted, we provided in section 1219 some background on some of the space users, large space users that have taken space in region. And interestingly, a significant number of those would have actually fitted the Science and Technology Park definition. Hopefully that provides some background on Gatwick and Crawley downturn.
Thank you very much. Right, so I think Mr. Keane, we're back to you again.
Thank you, sir. So your Roman 4, unless you think it's going to be useful, sir, the specific points that you raised there in relation to physical infrastructure, drainage, flooding, gas network, you've got our written submissions on those three matters in the statements that have been produced in response to your matters, issues and questions. So I don't propose to go over any of that. So I do note that you drew a particular attention to a question this morning about the main source of energy for the STP. And so I'll ask Mrs. Holloway just to come in and deal with that in a little more detail. And so if there's anything else in relation to, for example, drainage or flooding, I'm sure she'd be very happy to help you. But unless you think it would be useful, I don't think there's very much more that I want to add in relation to what's been written. And therefore has already been set out in some detail.
Mrs. Holloway, do come in.
Thank you, sir. I think just to respond to your direct question this morning about source of energy, if I can refer you, sir, back to CSA utility studies, which is SA 912, you'll see that there is a comment in there from Colin Smith Associates regarding the actual extent in terms of natural gas usage. And he quotes the figures that there's 2,300 kilowatts of gas expected versus 15,000 kilowatts of electricity. So I'm wondering, sir, if that would assist in terms of additional information. But what I would like also,
what page is that on SA9?
I haven't.
I can find it anyway. Don't worry. That's not a big thing now.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's
the other part is that our clients, Decorah and Waterford, again, are experienced in terms of green technology. If you look to our positioning statements, sir, on the executive summary page, when we're identifying where our site is, you'll also understand that there is blue lined ownership in terms of additional land that our clients own. And in Twynham, there is a solar farm already undertaken by Waterford Trading. And indeed, there's a current planning application in for Decorah and Glenby on behalf of potential solar power for the hub. We've also been looking, as you'll understand from our sustainability statement, which was produced by Vale Williams and HNW as an evidence-based document, SA 9.14, about the opportunities that we believe a Science and Tech Park would look at in terms of general green energy, green technology and green innovation. So it's certainly, sir, an area that we believe will be a USP for the Science Park should it be allocated.
Thank you. Right, thanks. Back to Graham again. Graham Keane.
So we're on to 5, which is the impact of the STP on the highways network. Is it justified in terms of congestion and safety? And does the network need to be improved to achieve a satisfactory level of mitigation? And therefore, and if so, is the improvement scheme deliverable? So again, you've got a lot of detail in the written statements that I won't take time going back over. You'll have seen that. I think the most important thing I can do, so before I ask Mr. Britton to pick up some of the specifics, is to just reiterate, remind everybody that again, in my view, for a project and an allocation for a project of this sort of scale and ambition and scope, there's a really quite notable and commendable degree of common ground here in relation to a number of things, but in particular, for the purposes of this question, highways. You've got a statement of common ground updated as recently as May of this year between Highways England, West Sussex as the Highways Authority, Mid Sussex District Council, obviously as the local planning authority, and Vale Williams and Connect on behalf of my clients. And so can I just take the opportunity, I raised this on the first day, but the statement of common ground on the cover sheet identifies all those parties, but in the introductory text where it says who's signed up, Vale Williams and Connect aren't mentioned, but for the avoidance of any doubt, as I said on day one, it is a statement of common ground between all the parties, and it's reached an enormous amount of common ground. So that sets out, as you'll have seen, the highways and transport work that's been undertaken in particular over the last year or so to assess the impact of the STP on the road network. And that's, of course, work that's based on the District Council strategic transport modelling work that's set out in document T7, the Council's document T7. We have a mitigation package that's been agreed with Mid Sussex District Council, West Sussex's Highways Authority and Highways England. And that comprises a mobility strategy, and I'll ask Mr. Britton to deal with that in a bit more detail in a moment, particularly on mode shift, but comprises a mobility strategy to prioritise, firstly, sustainable travel options before looking at physical improvements, but there is then also an agreed phased package of physical measures to mitigate residual traffic impact at key junctions as and when required. And so the common ground is worth emphasising. There are in principle design solutions and a draft phasing strategy for those physical mitigation measures at key junctions. They have been individually subject to junction capacity analysis and stage 1 road safety audits. And so can I, just for your note, another point, please, if I may, on the statement of common ground. You'll recall, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but if you don't, so don't turn it up, but you'll recall there's a table which specifies the particular work that would need to be done to those junctions. And in relation to the A23, A2300 Hickstead East Junction, which is part of the A2300 improvement scheme, in the column headed mitigation, there are some words in italics that say, and to be agreed with West Sussex County and Highways England pending RSA. So that's in relation to suggested signalisation there. So that the words in italics should have been deleted because there is now agreement between those parties as a result of the RSA work that's been done. So if I can ask you just when you're next looking at that, to just take a pen through the words in italics in that mitigation column. Right. Couple more points. So the cost estimates have been undertaken, high-level cost estimates to inform delivery, and it's common ground that the mitigation package is deliverable and that the junctions will operate within capacity and that the residual cumulative traffic impact will not be severe. So a really comprehensive degree of common ground on crucial highways matters. That's my context setting. You raised a number of points in relation to railway, location of the site to the railway, links with Burgess Hill, guided bus systems, and also mode share splits in relation to the mobility strategy. I'll ask Mr. Britton to pick up on those specific 4 points, but also to deal with any other highway mitigation matters that he thinks would assist you.
Thank you. Mr. Britton.
Morning, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Sorry, so I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, that's the problem. There's a little bit of feedback, but I think we're okay.
I think that should be fixed now. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Tim Britton. I'm an associate transport planner at Connect Consultants, working the Project Newton SA9 site promoters. Thank you to Mr. Keane for a very succinct context of all the work that's been undertaken over the last 12 months. Hopefully that's given you a good overview. I mean, your particular questions that you asked, I think I'll take your last one first, which was relating to the target mode shift in the mobility strategy that forms part of the proposal at Project Newton. The detailed, the strategic traffic modelling that was undertaken on behalf of Mid Sussex identified a 10% target mode shift to remove vehicular traffic associated with the science park. That was our starting point, and the mobility strategy that we've worked on in conjunction with West Sussex, Mid Sussex and Highways England has looked in detail at the likely origin and destination points for the traffic travelling to and from the science park, and we've identified key origins where we will be focusing our sustainable travel targets. Excuse me. And through that, obviously, Burgess Hill came out as the key priority point for targeting modal shift and sustainable travel by walking, cycling, and bus travel. We've looked at all the numbers of the likely trips to and from the key destinations, and we've looked at potential modal shift or likely switch from car to bus travel. And if you have a look in the mobility strategy, I don't know whether you've got that in front of you, but it's document SA911. It identifies a target number of trips that we would be targeting, which are admittedly are optimistic targets, but nonetheless they are considered realistic and reasonable to target. The overall reduction would be an equivalent to 29% reduction in total trips, which is varying from the different origins based on what we consider to be likely mode shift. So I've got a car alarm going off out in the car park with an open window. So yes, the target modal shift that's identified within the mobility strategy does appear to be higher than the 10% identified in the strategic modelling. But nonetheless, the mitigation analysis that we've done, which considers the reduction in traffic based on the mobility strategy, we have looked at the two scenarios. We've looked at the target modal shift scenario, and we've also looked at the worst case scenario with no modal shift. So all of our traffic analysis and the proposed mitigation schemes have considered both options. So we're not wholly reliant on achieving the modal shifts that are identified in the mobility strategy, but of course they are our targets. So I think hopefully you'll agree that that is a very robust way of analysing and proposing the mitigation strategy. You raised the question of how we link to Burgess Hill rail station, noting that the geographical distance between the two. The mobility strategy has been supported by some detailed public transport viability analysis. We consulted a specialist public transport consultant to assist us with that. And if you refer to the mobility strategy document, we've got a section, paragraph 5.75, the suggested mobility strategy at opening. One of the initial points.
Was that section 7.5?
575 in the mobility.
575, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's the suggested strategy at opening. First one being to divert the existing 100 service. Second point being to extend the existing 35 A and C bus services, circular and so clockwise and anti-clockwise circular routes around Burgess Hill. Third one being to provide a new station shuttle, which will be a bespoke shuttle service between Burgess Hill train station and the science park. It's likely to be a sort of 8 to 10 minute journey time between the train station and the science park. The aim of that is to pick up some Burgess Hill traffic and of course pick up traffic from the train station. We're looking at a target of 15% of the likely trips from Brighton and Hove could potentially switch to the train rather than driving. So they would catch the train from Brighton stations to Burgess Hill and would then pick up the bespoke shuttle service. We're looking at initially at a 4 bus per hour service.
All right, that's what I want to do.
To collect those rail travellers from the Brighton direction. Similarly, from Haywards Heath, we're looking at picking up a 25% potential of the Haywards Heath traffic to the Science Park, catch the train from Haywards Heath to Burgess Hill and be picked up by the shuttle bus and transported to the Science Park.
I know there's a tangential question or not, or one that's possibly an impossible question, but I'll ask it. You've got a more, how can I put this? A more extensive station layout at Haywards Heath than you've got at Burgess Hill. At Burgess Hill, you've just got the 2 platforms, as far as I can remember, and a fairly tightly constrained piece of railway property. So I don't think there's anything you could do in terms of increasing capacity for trains at Burgess Hill. Is there something at Vivelsfield you could do to kind of compensate for that?
Could certainly well be, yes. We haven't looked in detail at Wivelsfield. We've focused on Burgess Hill simply because it's Burgess Hill station and closer to the centre of the town. But as the planning application progresses through the next stages, we will be consulting with Network Rail and looking at options to improve the infrastructure at either of those 2 stations.
Okay, thank you for that. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
I think only the other question that you mentioned was clarifying what we meant by the enhanced bus service permeating the site and guided bus route. You will notice in my master plan and from various documents that we've submitted, we are proposing an exemplar bus hub within the Project Newton site, which will be located very close to the main vehicular access to the site, just off Cookfield Road. We've talked to the bus operators, and with the bus strategy, it's a viable option to divert existing buses and to bring the new bus services into the site. Bus hub where there'll be an interchange, we'll be providing the workplace, cafe, charging docks, electric bikes, electric charging units, to have that as a sort of bus interchange. And there'll be the potential for bus sort of shuttle buses within the site to circulate people within Project Newton, so the general service buses don't have to infiltrate too far into the site and add journey time and costs onto the existing bus services.
Could you just deal with the revised?
And is the company, are the bus companies on board with that?
Yes, we've spoken to both Metrobus and Compass, both of whom are very much on board and keen to talk to us about this. Metrobus we haven't talked about guided bus specifically, but discussions with Metrobus have been looking at perhaps driverless or autonomous vehicles, perhaps the opportunity to have something within the site, and that's certainly something that we're keen to explore further.
Thank you very much.
One other, if I may, which hasn't been brought up thus far, but you may have noticed that there's been a revised master plan that's come forward as part of our May 2021 update of the Transport Statement of Common Ground. As a result of the more recent detailed modelling, the proposed Hamburger junction, the sort of access junction on the A2300, has been expanded from the illustration that was in the initial Regulation 19 submission. And as a result of that, the area within phase 1 of Project Newton has been squeezed a little bit. The overall numbers of scale and quantum mix of buildings hasn't been affected significantly. Slightly.
That's 21,000 square foot, wasn't it, the figure? I think.
Something to those, that order, yes. Yeah. I don't have the number right in front of me. However, that still does incorporate the bus hub, and the new access drawing, which is appended to the latest May Statement of Common Ground, shows you the location of the bus hub and shows you the new revised layout.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, Mr. Keane.
Thank you, sir. And so you'll know the revised illustrative master plan is attached to, I think, at least 2 of the Matter 5 hearing statements that are put in by Vale Williams. So that's probably the easiest place to do a little bit of compare and contrast. But as Mr. Britton has said, it makes little difference to the disposition of things within phase 1, apart from making sure that the hub, for example, works in an efficient and effective way in relation to the revision to the junction. And so the other thing before I just move on is to remind you that the phasing strategy that's been devised incorporates flexibility in terms of both the scale and timing of each phase in conjunction with traffic modelling and assessment. and that is obviously an ongoing collaboration between Highways England, West Sussex as Highways Authority, and the District Council. So this isn't a one chunk opportunity, as it were. This is designed as an evolving thing that can be tailored in terms of mitigation infrastructure as each phase comes forward. And indeed, the policy itself makes provision for that, as you'll have seen. So that takes us on to Roman 6, and I can be quick with this one because it raises the question of whether the policy goes beyond being aspirational. Will it effectively deliver in sustainable transport terms? I'll bring Mr. Britton back in if he wishes to add anything, but so you've already heard about the close proximity to the 3,500 homes in the Northern Arc, in between which there will be good local pedestrian and cycle links. There's obviously the proximity relationship and similar links with Burgess Hill, the hub on the other side of the A2300, Bolney Grange Business Park, just to the west of the SA9 site, and all well served by bus services, as you've just heard, which of course can be and are going to be improved in due course. So we've got a highly sustainable site that will deliver very real opportunities for non-car travel. I'm just going to look, Mr. Britton's in the room with me, so although you can't see him, but do you want to add anything to that? No, he's shaking his head. So I think we've covered 6, unless you have a specific question arising.
No, we've mentioned SA 12 and 13 before in terms of priority locations, so we can move on from that.
Yeah.
On to 7, if you like.
7, so thank you. Significant impacts resulting from the STP. Can they be satisfactorily mitigated? Well, sir, I'll bring Mrs. Holloway in just a moment, but you've got detailed and comprehensive assessment work covered by the Project Newton team across a large range of disciplines, which demonstrates that this STP can be delivered without significant adverse environmental impacts, or without any significant environmental impacts as far as we can see at this stage. And in particular, sir, we've got highways impacts that can be mitigated. I don't think, unless you or Mr. Britton want to say anything more about that, we've touched upon that in some detail, but perhaps landscape and visual, sustainability and ecology, 3 matters that I might just invite Mrs. Holloway to address you on briefly, just to cover off the main, at least as it seems to me, potential environmental impacts that might arise in addition to highways, which I hope we've already done sufficiently for present purposes.
Mrs. Holloway.
Thank you, sir. Not really much to add in terms of our MIQ statements, but just really, as Mr. Keane said, we've dealt with highways. We believe that our robust evidence base and behind the positioning statement covers quite detailed the landscape visual impact assessment and how our scheme might transition with the surrounding countryside. We have looked at, as we said, in regard to other matters regarding sustainability opportunities, about green tech and innovation. So we don't believe there are any environmental impacts in that regard. And I'd refer you back, sir, to our sustainability statement again. We've got the evidence base from Ecology Solutions that indicate that the initial surveys indicate no concerns regarding the ecological state of the current site and our potential developments. There is no ancient woodland on the site, and we have, where possible, considered the retention of trees and hedgerows to be maintained. The flood zone issues, or appreciate that they're raised by TICO and DMH Sallard's representation, but our response to that would be there's only a very small narrow margin of zone 2 and 3. I think it equates, sir, to some 60 metres on the northern part of the site. But again, we've got further details and provision by Brad Brooks in terms of the robust evidence base behind that. There was some concern from Chilmark very, very early on in 2014, I believe, about pylons, which are not an issue, sir, on the site. And you'll note, so there's no other objections or no objection from the Environment Agency. So in short, sir, the answer to the question is we do not believe there are any significant environmental impacts regarding the STP.
Thank you very much. Right.
And so just picking up one brief point on landscape and visual, you'll have seen that there's work by Pegasus in support of sorry, so I'm getting a bit of feedback again, in support of the the allocation and incorporated within the with the documentation submitted on behalf of my clients, and in particular, so the work that's been done on potential scale of buildings from different perspectives as one looks into the site from various places, but also that important thing about having the right sort of scale and presentation on the entrance to the site, and having a proper attraction of a gateway or whatever it wants to be called in relation to the to drawing people in. So there's been a lot of work done on heights of buildings in different phases, and you can see in the landscape visual assessment work that the thought that's gone into that in relation to how the presentation has evolved through the illustrative master plan.
And maximum 4 stories, I think you said.
Yes, so that's right. Depending on the phasing, different in different locations, but yeah, that's right. So there is assessment, I think, in parts of the site of up to 5 from recollections. But this is Holloway will tell me if I'm wrong. But the basic approach is for an up to 4-story. I think, is that right, Ms. Holloway?
I can confirm it is. There are elements up to 5, but I would also like to add, if I may, that the new amended layout has also been assessed by Pegasus, and they stand by their conclusions regarding the layout. So just to add that context, that relates to the updated layout. Also.
Thank you.
Well, my son who works near Hong Kong says 5 stories is low-rise development. Anyway, we'll move on.
So that takes us to Roman 8, sir. Would SA9 result in excessive amount of employment development in one location? Would it be sustainable? So I think we've probably covered some of this already. I'll ask Mr. Osborne just to come back in, pick up anything that needs saying in addition to what he's already said. But you've already heard about the evidence showing that the park can only be developed in one cohesive location to ensure a critical mass and its regional function, and why the scale of what's proposed is appropriate and necessary to ensure that those sustainable opportunities that the policy seeks can, in fact, be delivered. So, Mr. Osborne, I don't know any points on location or scale or phasing, your experience elsewhere, those sorts of things that you touched upon earlier.
Hopefully you can hear me, sir.
Yes, Mr. Osborne.
I touched earlier on critical mass, but what we mean by that really is it's got the scale to attract these innovation biased businesses that have been looking, and in our experience are still looking for space in the region. We've carefully considered the phasing also, so to allow for phasing to, if you like, flex in line with demand. It's an indicative master plan, but if we look historically at the manufacturing, assembly and R&D businesses that have taken space locally and are still looking for space, we would expect to see significant demand for the location. And that scale is needed to assist both in terms of viability and enabling works for infrastructure and the provision of ancillary accommodation, which I mentioned earlier, and most importantly, to create that master plan, coherent master plan, to attract different ranges of businesses and business types to the site. There is nothing quite like this in our region, so that's really the reason to have the scale in this one location. Thank you.
Thank you.
So 9 is the implications of the new Class E, and I just think I can reiterate what Mr. Marsh told you earlier, that policy DP1 makes clear that the science park associated definition would be a requirement for any acceptable uses in the park, and that's a definition that restricts uses and operations and is not use class specific. So this is a matter, again, common ground with us and the local planning authority that can be regulated by conditions and obligations, other mechanisms to secure appropriate uses on site as required, and therefore to ensure the justification for and effectiveness of SA9. I don't know if Ms. Holloway wants to add anything to that.
Mrs. Holloway.
No, I need to reiterate that our conversations with Mid Sussex, both at planning policy officer level and development management officer level, are that there is a number of options and mechanisms that we could use. And we are well versed in dealing with this in terms of Vale Williams planning experience across a number of options, as I say, 3 conditions or user clauses. We have a number of clients and areas where this is this type of restriction occurs. So we don't believe that there are any concerns regarding the SPA definition, and that's formed part of our discussions with Mid Sussex.
Thank you.
So, and then that's brings us to 10, and hopefully that will see us into to a coffee break, he says optimistically. The impact of COVID. So no hiding from the fact that COVID, the pandemic, has obviously had a significant impact on let alone the region, the country, and particularly in relation to this region around Gatwick. But sir, as you'll see from the written statements that have been put in, sectors such as R&D and manufacturing have not generally at least been significantly adversely affected, is the analysis that we've reached. And of course, B8 distributors and various other operators, some of whom have benefited. I suppose the important point though, sir, is that the 2020 update to the economic growth assessment considers short and long-term peaks and troughs in the market, and importantly reflects different growth scenarios. So it's taking a longer term view, and the clear conclusion there, sir, is that the sub-region is a relatively buoyant commercial property market because of its central location and its excellent connectivity. And importantly, there's a strong level of investor and developer confidence in the Northwest Sussex market. So the projection in the EGA is that this area will offer significant future growth potential over the period right through to 2036. And as you've already been told, sir, this morning by others, that the SA9 STP is the only opportunity in either adopted or emerging plans in Northwest Sussex to deliver an STP. So there is this golden opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, which hopefully will act as a very real catalyst to the economy. And therefore, in the pandemic is not a reason to justify any change to SA9. I think Mr. Osborne had a point, if I may, sir, and then that will be the end of from me on.
Other people, and then we'll have coffee. So I'll bring Steve Molnar and Peter Lever in a minute or two. We'll start with Andrew Osborne.
Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you.
It's a very small point in relation to COVID. We've talked about the B8 market, which isn't relevant for the science and technology part, but as Mr. Keane mentioned, the R&D, manufacturing and assembly sectors, those businesses have carried on largely and worked through COVID. And when we looked at the master plan, we were very careful to look both at historic demand and current inquiries. We have broadly 2/3 of the accommodation within the master plan showing R&D and manufacturing type facilities, with around a third as B1A offices. And it's true to say that COVID has probably affected the office market the most, with people not wanting to come back and people being encouraged to work from home. But we're seeing in the market now, as the impact of vaccines starting to have an effect, with people working from home for such a long time, that interaction between colleagues is starting to affect businesses. But importantly, businesses in sectors that are science and technology industries, they need collaboration, and they recognize the need for people to be able to work in environments where they can physically be together. So we've started to see the office market pick up, and I think, acknowledging the cyclical nature of a property market, the scheme will have some offices, but that will be a small element of the overall master plan within the Science Park scheme. I don't have anything more to add.
Thank you. Mr. Keane, did you have any final points before I bring Mr. Molnar in?
Sorry, sir.
Mr. Keane?
I didn't hear that, sorry.
Well, thank you, Mr. Osborne. Thank you for what you've contributed. That's helpful. I was just going to bring Mr. Keane in to see if you had any final comments on your kind of group presentation, as it were.
No, sir, I don't think so. Thank you. That's. I hope we've covered the 10 questions and also picked up your supplementary points that you've raised this morning.
So I'll bring Mr. Molnar in next. Steve Molnar, welcome to our proceedings.
Good morning. Thank you very much, sir. I'm Steve Molnar, Technical Director at Terence O'Rourke in the planning team, and we're here on behalf of St Modwyn's, who are the promoters and developers of the SA4 site, which, as you're probably aware, is part of a larger mixed-use permission that's currently being implemented now, and this is an additional part of that site which has been allocated through this plan for employment use. So these sites are actively being developed to the north of both the residential area and also a couple of large business units which are on the site now. A couple of commercial units there, storage and distribution, one of which is occupied, and the other one's under construction, and I believe has an occupier lined up for that one as well. Just in relation to point 8 on EU summarised our position earlier on that very well. Just by way of further background on that, we St Modwyn see the site at SA4 as very much another B8 site. That's where the interest lies. That's where the market demand is, and there has been a lot of interest in it for that use. It's an excellent location, and it's in line with what St Modwyn are developing on the rest of the site. So I won't say anything else in relation to into 9, but coming on to 10 regarding COVID, you'll have seen in our appended to our response, our statement rather, a report by JLL, and that's my colleague Oliver, who was with us here, which explains the strong demand that actually exists even in these times in relation to this type of development in the Crawley and Gatwick area. We are actively in the process of putting together the beginnings of a planning application. We have some pre-app discussions that are actively underway at the moment with Mid Sussex Development Management team. We have the next meeting, in fact, next week, when we're going to go through our latest thinking on how the site might work. That's again by way of background, but I think perhaps in relation to point little Roman 10, if I could perhaps hand over to Peter, who I think will be able to sort of bring you up to speed on where we are with that. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Peter Lever.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just really just to go a little bit more some meat on the bones, really. I think you made reference to the short statement that we made, in particularly that the market for industrial warehouse premises has been resilient and has actually been properly functioning. And just there's two things really: A, give some evidence to support that view, and secondly, just to consider why that is the case actually. Despite what's happened to the economy because of COVID and other uncertainty, such as Brexit. But in terms of the first point, the evidence pointing to a resilient and a properly functioning market, we've referred to three things. First of all, is the sort of letting and sales activity since September over the last 6 to 9 months. Inquiry rates, just generally, but also in relation to the St Modwyn scheme. And then thirdly, there is development activity. So taking letting and sales, in point 4 of my short addendum to Terence O'Rourke's statement, I refer to 6 deals, of which 2 are under offer and close to completion. And they are to Amazon, Hermes Parcelnet, DHL Parcels, Winebox, Balf Bikes, and Sano. So it's a mixture of distribution, logistics, e-fulfillment, but also some I was going to say local companies, but regional companies, companies from Croydon looking for space down in this market. And they're generally ranging from, this is for the industrial and warehouse units, not the offices, generally ranging from 20,000 square feet to 80,000 square feet. There's also demand for stuff, property or premises beyond that, above 100,000 square feet as well. Now, one of these deals is for the second unit at St Modwen Park, and that's the DH parcels, and that's that unit, St Modwen. Despite the uncertainty in COVID, they committed to build that unit in September last year, and that unit is now close to completion. It's due to complete in the second week of July, and solicitors are instructed with DHL parcels looking to take that unit. In terms of inquiry rates, we make a reference to some somewhat generic or known requirements in the market. Amazon have a variety of requirements. DPD have an inquiry, but also we've fielded inquiries from, you made reference to it actually, the manufacturer looking to relocate from Croydon, who has a requirement between 80 and 100,000 square feet. And also recently we've fielded an inquiry from a removals and storage company who are based in East Grinstead. So despite the uncertainty in COVID, there's been a lot of transactions and there's been a lot of market interest in the actual St Modwen scheme. And that includes interest in parcel SA4. Whilst there is no planning certainty in the form of a planning permission, there's still a lot of interest, and actually discussions are being held with a particular operator for a designer building unit of 115,000 square feet. In terms of development activity, as I say, St Modwen have committed to building this unit 2, and that is happening. We also have represented GLP, or what they used to be known as Gaisley, who are a very experienced industrial and distribution developer, and they bought a site in Manor Royal in Crawley in January of this year, and they bought it at a record land value of £3.2 million per acre. And again, this is a demonstration of that there's still a lot of confidence in the market for this particular product, i.e. industrial and warehousing. So why is that? Why is there still, despite all this uncertainty of COVID, why is that? Well, it's two reasons, really. First of all, COVID and Brexit, to a certain extent, whilst it's had an impact, a negative impact on certain parts of the economy, that's affected more probably the office market than the industrial and distribution market. Now, the industrial and distribution market has actually benefited in certain cases, and particularly the acceleration of e-commerce and e-tail. And this has been widely commented upon, but essentially it's brought the market, general view that it's accelerated this market between 5 and 10 years. This Crawley Gatwick isn't the only area of the country that has benefited from this. This is wide the whole UK economy. But Gatwick Crawley does have strong fundamental characteristics in its any event, which makes it a resilient and a high demand area, and that's to do with its central location, a critical mass of population and amenities. It has excellent transport links. It has access to a large and a highly skilled workforce. It's been made reference already to the diverse economy. It's not just about the airport, but there are other important industries such as defence, pharmaceuticals and logistics. And there are also strong quality of life factors. The third and final factor is that there's a general shortage of available premises and land. And for a long time, actually, there has been an imbalance between demand and supply, with the demand for premises and supply far greater than the supply of land. Now, to a certain extent, that's because the supply of land has been constrained. But what this has done is that this has driven up both land values and rents to quite a considerable degree over the last 5 to 6 years. So generally, in summary, we think that despite the uncertainty, there is a lot of resilience. The market is functioning properly, and there is a clear need for the allocated lands, particularly SAA4 and that land beyond that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to break for coffee now, and we'll come back at 11:45, and I'll invite the council to come back if they want to mop up with any points they've heard from other people. So break now until 11:45. Thank you. Right, Charlotte, are we ready?
Yes, yep.
Fantastic. Right, we'll make a move. Right, we're back in session. And I've noticed that Peter Lever has his hand up. Was there anything else you wanted to say, Mr. Lever, before I bring Mr. Brown in?
Apologies, no, sorry, I'll take my hand down.
Fine, always the best way. Right, Mr. Brown, are there any final points you'd like to make in relation to SA9?
So unless there are any things that you would like us to come back on, I don't think I need to at this stage. No, thank you.
Right, we will continue then with the policies on the economy. We'll come to matter 5.2, where I group all the other employment allocations together, and I ask whether they are justified and deliverable, and are they sufficient to meet the needs of the district during the planned period. I then run down various aspects of a number of the policies, which we can probably come to when we meet each one individually if we need to do that. So in terms of the comments, the council's response is that there's been a robust site selection process and assessment. The SA has shown that the proposed employment sites are justified and effective. There's been ongoing engagement with the site promoters, which means the plan has been positively prepared and is consistent with national policy, and it conforms, for example, with NPPF paragraphs 80 and 81. In terms of some of the individual sites, the council says with SA3, they've now agreed to allow for B8 use, but in light of use class E, a further amendment is proposed to ensure that the specific uses are referred to in the policy requirements, e.g. through office business, etc., rather than reference to the use classes order. And that's to ensure that all forecasted need can be met. SA4 makes reference to a comprehensive landscaping scheme and a landscape screen on the southern boundary. That instead of talking about a strategic gap between Cockthorne and Crawley, it talks about the policy being replaced by policy DP13, which mentions coalescence, something we talked about last week. SA13, landscaping requirements adequately sets out in policy SA Gen, so no need to repeat here. SA6 informs me that there is a resolution to grant planning permission for this site, subject to a section 106. SA7 refers to the fact that it's wholly within the AONB, but it's adjacent to the A23 and other employment uses. It's also previously developed land, can hardly be considered tranquil. I have to agree with that. Its potential, therefore, for significant adverse impact in the AONB is low. However, council go on to say there may be opportunities to contribute to some of the high-wheeled AONB management team objectives, and these should be explored further at the planning application stage. And then SA8, Natural England raised no objection to the requirement for a minimum barrier, 15 metres. They've got down. I know some parties were asking for, I think, double that amount in relation to woodlands. Terence O'Rourke, SA4 is identified as an employment site in the plan following a comprehensive assessment of a range of potential sites, and the site performs well against the site selection criteria. It is suitable and available for development. Greenfield sites are necessary to meet the district's needs. There are no equivalent sites. Just one point before, in relation to going back to SA9 for a minute, and whether there was one or more sites offered. I think what I was getting to or referring to earlier on was that at regulation 18 stage, I understand there was an option to go south. I understand in regulation 19 that was taken out, so don't need to say any more on that. Any comments by way of introduction that Mr. Brown or his team would like to mention?
So I think we would only be repeating what's in our main matter statements. So thank you, but no.
Is there anything that any other parties, Terence O'Rourke, for example, would like to say?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I can. Loud and well.
Can you see me? Oh yeah, I can see me now
I
as
can
well.
hear you and I can see you. I can't smell you, but I can see you and I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Yeah. Just in terms of the points that have been raised around things like coalescence and open space and so on, and there's kind of a history to the site, as you'll be aware, and I mean basically circumstances change and things move on, and certainly since 2013 when the application was submitted, 2015 when it had a resolution to grant, 2016 when the decision notice was issued after the section 106 was concluded. Things have moved on considerably, not just on the site where basically construction is underway and well underway now. The last reserve matters are now in, and it's all coming together. But also in terms of the local plan context, clearly since that time, when the planning application was submitted in a context where the plan wasn't up to date, there was no 5-year supply for housing. That was kind of the context of the application back then, and the permission ultimately. Obviously the district plan is now adopted now, and we've now got this site allocations DPD to look at as well. And so the whole thing has been, in terms of the development strategy for the district, has been revisited. The needs have been updated. There have been site searches, sustainability appraisals, and it's clear it's reasonable to revisit a site like this in the context of seeking sites to meet the development needs up to 2031 in sustainable locations. So I think that's really where we are now. It's basically, things have moved on considerably since the original application for the site was for the wider site was approved and considered and approved. And the site does perform well against the site's appraisal criteria. It scored very well in that exercise, and so I think there's that's kind of a bit of background in terms of the coalescence point itself. I mean, clearly the built-up area of Copthorne has now, as a result of the permission, has actually moved up to the M23 in effect. And that's now shown on the policies map as being the case, and it includes obviously the SA4 site. Clearly, there remains an issue about the sensitivity of the southern frontage and the need to think about that southern boundary and providing a comprehensive landscape scheme that includes helping to assimilate development on the site into its context and the landscape, and that's part of the ongoing pre-application discussions that we're having with development management at the moment, and that we'll be continuing next week. I didn't hear the discussions that took place last week on coalescence, but just one or two observations. I think certainly in terms of the idea of separate identity of settlements and leaving one settlement moving across a space, a gap, whatever you want to call it, and then arriving at another one. In terms of Crawley and Copthorne, that exists already considerably. I mean, if you look on plan or at an aerial photograph, settlements can actually be quite close together, but it's the perception of how you get from one to the other using the most obvious routes like the A264, the A2011. You've actually got, I think, roughly about 3 kilometres where you're actually travelling through what appears to be a very wooded landscape on leaving Copthorne at the Copthorne Road roundabout and heading west across the M23 junction before you get to the big hotel by the Hazelwick roundabout in Crawley. It's quite a densely wooded sort of corridor through there. So that is a decent space to which to experience leaving Copthorne and arriving in Crawley. So I don't see this necessarily a big issue there. Whatever might be happening away hidden behind the trees, you have that perception of actually leaving one place and arriving at another quite comfortably, I think. I think it's roughly 2k from Hazelwick to the site, and roughly 1k from the site to the Copthorne roundabout as well. So you just for a bit of context there. So the intention would be along the site frontage with the A264 here to actually replicate that woodland setting as much as we can on that frontage. So that's essentially where we're going with the design of the site and the landscape design in particular, in terms of preparing a comprehensive landscape scheme. We're looking at maximising the setback from that frontage to make sure we've got space to put some decent planting in. Also looking at sinking buildings into the ground because the site is actually, that part of the site is actually filled. So there is some inert fill in there that can be taken out, and that's historic. It goes back donkey's years in terms of when that actually happened. So we can take material out of there to lower the levels by a couple of meters or so. We could look at using some of that material to create some mounding on parts of the site to help with screening. And then you can landscape that, you can plant on top of it. There's a range of things that we're looking at that can be achieved. And there's also obviously the planting itself. We're looking at significant generous planting. I think we're considering the use of semi-mature specimens in some parts to get some kind of instant impact. And so that all of that work will help with the screening and softening in terms of what you can actually see when you're passing along that frontage. So we're confident that we can provide a nice, good green setting there that's commensurate with what you see before and after the site when you approach it from either direction. We don't believe that there's going to be a significant effect on that perception of separate identity of the settlements there at all. And certainly, in terms of the building design itself, we can also make sure that we look at colour materials and textures to make sure that it helps to sort of blend into what you do see the building actually blends in as much as possible. So yeah, we're fairly confident that a good job can be done on that, and we're in discussion, as we say, with development management at Mid Sussex to that effect.
Just two things. Thank you for what you said. Two things. One is that in the debate last week, you say you weren't at, we did discuss coalescence, and it was pointed out to me that it's nowhere mentioned in the MPPF.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's an interesting point that I have to bear in mind. And secondly, looking at this site and walking onto it, I would say alone of the SA2, it's careful what I say here, SA2 to SA8 sites, I felt there was something quite special about this site. When you walk on, even though you're right close to the sort of traffic noise, very, very close to a junction, it's partly because of the topography, maybe, partly because of the green, the sward, and some of the kind of vegetation. It just seemed to me it was a site that merited careful consideration. It seems to me, from what you just said to me, you're giving it that careful consideration. So a site that could sort of repay careful consideration, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, indeed, and that's well, as I explained, and as you recognise there, that is the key focus for how we're dealing with the design, and there's definitely a good scheme there that we can arrive at in discussion with the development management team. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. If there's nothing else from any other party on matter 5.3, I will move on. Once I scribbled something down, I will move on to matter. Steve, right, Graham Keane.
So it's not really on the matter, but you raised at the beginning a point about whether you're correct as to the original Reg 18 stage. There were two potential STP sites, one south of the A23 and one to the north. Absolutely right, sir. And as made clear, if you look in particular at the 5.1 Roman 2 written response to your questions from Vale Williams, that sets out some of the history of that. But so just to confirm, that is correct. The District Council assessed both as part of the site selection process, and indeed their site selection paper number 4 details that, and indeed that as a result of the initial assessment, the two sites were further assessed under 14 headings to further refine that assessment down and to reach the point where the District Council preferred my client's site. And as I indicated earlier, that is the only one that it went through Reg 19 and is before you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. Right, so moving on, if there's nothing else on matter 5.2, we'll go on to 5.3, which is all about policy SA34 and what do you do with existing employment sites, and how effective is the plan in protecting these sites from other uses such as housing? Should the plan set out the parameters of an independent assessment in relation to the attractiveness of the market and the likelihood of future employment uses on these sites, and over what period of time? And the council's response is that the recent change to the use classes order means that little protection can be offered by this policy, and the council will be prepared to make a modification if required. Policy SA34 places emphasis to demonstrate that the site premises are no longer needed and or viable for employment use when seeking permission for any loss of employment space in areas identified by SA34. Just thinking of lots of other plans that I've dealt with, nearly all of them whether they're in small rural towns or in London boroughs or anywhere in between. They refer to a robust marketing criteria to give the policy some teeth. And I'm minded to suggest a form of words based on several previous examinations, if the council would like me to do that. But certainly we talk about time period and about the proper marketing. But I'm obviously in the council's hands on that. In relation to Barton Wilmore, they refer me to the hub site and what's been happening there and the amount of jobs that are being generated, and the need to avoid unnecessary restrictions on the market impacting on the attractiveness of the site to occupiers. So there's that. So those are the points that have been made. Does anybody wish to speak on this one? Mr. North, Tim North.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Tim North, representing Dukesfield Properties Limited.
Got your shredder on again, I see.
Sorry?
You've got your shredder on again. There's a kind of a sound like...
Yeah, we have a lot to shred.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm putting you off. I apologise. Do carry on.
No, not at all, sir. Thank you. I'm sorry we haven't got a nice wooded background for you. Some other nice planning situation. But our view on this, sir, is really being set out in the representations that we put you on, put the council on Regulation 80 and 19. We put forward a number of representations there. So one on Appendix A to the existing employment sites, another one separately on SA 34, and another one on the sustainability appraisal relating to the employment strategy and the existing employment sites, both in terms of reasonable alternatives for assessment. So your question points quite clearly to the effectiveness of the policy in protecting existing and allocated employment sites. The council rightly says in paragraph 3.1, they set out the purposes of policy at 3.4. We have no points to make on that, sir. Quite obvious that those are important issues. My client's view, sir, is that policy SA 34 can have, in certain cases, unintended consequences. That is leading to certain employment sites being effectively sterilised and preventing their benefit in terms of an alternative use seen in terms of environmental, social and economic terms. That is our key issue here, sir. If there was no SA 34, and rightly applicants would have then to place their reliance on policy DP1, and there, so you'll recall that that policy talks about the effective use of employment land and premises will be made by protecting allocated and existing employment land and premises, unless it can be demonstrated that there is no reasonable prospect of its use or continued use for employment, or it can be demonstrated that the loss of employment provision is outweighed by the benefits or relative need for the proposed alternative use. So that rightly puts the onus on the applicant, and we have no quibbles about that. So it's a reasonable policy. Our criticism, if there is one, sir, is looking at that policy DP1 in the context of policy SA34, because it seems to me, sir, that there may be a potential problem of policy interpretation here, because having just read out the DP1 aspect of protecting employment land, policy SA34 is, we feel, more restrictive, because it says proposals on existing employment sites that would involve the loss of employment land or premises will only be supported where it can be clearly demonstrated by the applicant that the site premises is no longer needed and or viable for employment use. So that seems to me to be a more restrictive policy, and we are concerned about that. The aspect which the council mentioned, again, we have no axe to grind on this issue. they rightly say in their response in their policy paper MSDC-02E, paragraph 3.5, recognising that each employment space is different and a range of circumstances may apply relating to their viability, the Council feels that it would be difficult to apply a set of standards or parameters, timescales for any assessment or justification, and that justification should be considered on a case-by-case basis. We have no qualms about that, so that's very reasonable, and we would agree with that. So, but where we do have an issue here is when we come to demonstrate in individual cases, such as my client's site, which is an outworn, outdated estate, which is really, the buildings have gone through a 90-year period and are no longer justified, where an alternative employment use, we say, is not viable, why there has been no assessment of existing employment sites at the appropriate stage when assessing whether they could be used for alternative purposes. We can find no assessment or paper being produced which looks at those existing employment sites to see whether they should all be retained. Now, obviously, we're not talking about places such as the Hub. We're talking about those outworn, outdated sites which form part of Appendix A to Policy SA34. And there's 66 of those sites, but and some of them are clearly in a poor condition. They certainly do not reflect, as we see it, either the requirements of paragraph 120 of the NPPF, or in fact the Mid-Sussex Economic Development Strategy, and looking at the themes which that entails, which is obviously to look at need, but also to improve the appearance of these sites. We've come to we have not come across any assessment of that nature, sir. What we say is that the assessment of those existing employment sites should have taken place if we're looking at housing provision in terms of the third stage of the site selection process. I think that's site selection paper number 3, for various reasons. Firstly, because those sites, when looked at in terms of the SA, will automatically have not been assessed in terms of whether alternative uses could take place on those sites. It seems to me so that one of the key areas here is the fact that the guidance on sustainability appraisal does ask you, or does ask the council, I beg your pardon, so to assess those sites which are in one use to see whether they still should be the same use. And the reason why that's important, sir, is because if you get to a situation such as my client's site, where you can pass through the first two the site selection papers, when you get to the third, because it's an employment site, it's automatically prevented from being assessed, particularly against other allocated sites in the plan for housing. It's automatically rejected, if that's the right word, sir, because, and that becomes apparent when you look at the paper produced by the local planning authority, at site selection paper 3 on housing sites, and then it assesses the results of each of the settlements. It's under Appendix A, summary of site assessment results at each assessment stage. You see, sir, as far as Ashurst Wood is concerned, my client's site, it says that the site is safeguarded for B-class employment use by policy ASW16 of the May Ashurst Wood Neighbourhood Plan 2015-31. Redevelopment for residential use would not be policy compliant. It sort of automatically pushes us into a situation where, in any event, we have to justify an exceptional reason why this should not be looked at in terms of other alternative uses. Now, as I say, I accept that proposition, but if we are going to produce a site allocations DPD, that also seems to be to be an opportunity at which to assess these existing employment sites. It's certainly advocated, I say, in the EU guidance on sustainability appraisal, paragraph 513. That is our main consideration. So, because there is no assessment, as far as I can see, I stand obviously to be corrected, there's been an assessment of existing employment sites to see whether they should remain. But if we are in that position, we are automatically excluded when we get to a certain stage. And that seems to be difficult to understand, because the alternative of that is that if there was a sustainability appraisal option, where it relates to the employment strategy, where there was more land released than the 15 or 17.35 hectares, and that was to take into consideration the fact that certain sites might not come forward, the fact that intensification of certain sites might not take place, and allows for certain sites, and I'm not saying large numbers, but certain sites in employment use to be used for other alternative purposes. That, coupled with, as I say, the rejection of our site at stage 3, puts us in a very difficult position. And that's the reason why our objections relate to SA 34. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for that. Is there a council response to what Mr. North has said?
So yes, can I just briefly? So the first point is there is already an existing district plan policy, which is DP1, which specifically says that effective use of employment land and premises will be made by protecting allocated and existing employment land and premises, unless it can be demonstrated there's no reasonable prospect of its use or continued use for employment. So the first point really is that the principle of protecting existing employment land is already enshrined in the district plan itself. And if I understood Mr. North correctly, I don't think he takes issue with the general principle that it's appropriate to have such a policy. I think his point really goes to wording and flexibility more than principle. But the principle is obviously right in my submission, and in any event, it's in the district plan already. So the second point is that what the district plan doesn't do is it doesn't identify which employment sites have particular value, and it doesn't tell you exactly how one would go about the process of demonstrating that there's no reasonable prospect of use or continued use, or that the loss is outweighed by other benefits. And so it's that gap, if you like, that SA 34 seeks to fill. In particular, one of the first things that SA 34 does is that it identifies the particular sites to which it applies. Whether you call that an allocation, it's putting a line around a particular site and making it clear what the policy applies to. And in particular, so one of the things that you will have picked up about the sites which SA 34 identifies is that they are all of them sites which are in active existing employment use. And that, in the council's view, is pretty clear evidence of the fact that they are fulfilling a useful function which deserves to be protected. So what SA 34 does not take that much further forward is identifying exactly what kind of evidence might be required to demonstrate that those sites should be released. And so that picks up on your observation at the outset that in dealing with other plans, most plans, whether it's in the policy or whether it's in the text that goes alongside them, have somewhere outlined exactly what sort of evidence would be expected. For example, a period of marketing and so on. So from the council's perspective, can I say that if you consider that the policy or the plan would be made more robust, would be made sound by the inclusion of that, we would welcome your offer of some suggested wording. I mean, that self-evidently, we want policy SA34 to be effective, and if you consider that it's because it doesn't have that, then please, as I say, we would welcome that. So can I then relate that to Mr. North's objection? And I understand, of course, the points that he brings today are primarily matters of general application, but against the backdrop, as he very fairly acknowledges, I mean, he's here for a reason. He's here for a client who has a particular site, who would like to be able to release that site for housing. And I think in that context, so it is worth saying that one of the reasons why the council has not allocated Mr. North's client's site for housing is because it is an existing employment site. It has active occupiers at the moment. He describes it as outworn and outdated, but you will be aware of the fact that in most areas there is a need for sometimes cheaper, sometimes a little bit tattier accommodation. It's suitable for startup businesses. It's suitable for some of the less glamorous sorts of operations that are around. The fact that they are not all looking for brand spanking new state-of-the-art premises doesn't mean there isn't a need for them. And it's that need which Mr. North's client's site meets. And so that's quite important in terms of the suggestion that you made about criteria for the release of a site, because like you, I mean, I have experience of other plans with their own particular policies, and you will know yourself the extent to which, or the kind of policies that you have in mind, but applying most the sort of things that one would generally expect to see elsewhere, there would normally be a requirement for a period of vacancy followed by a period of marketing with no uptake. Against any of those sort of run-of-the-mill policies, Mr. North's client's site would fail, and it would fail because there is an existing occupier there. And I do note, sir, that to the extent that what he's asking you to do is to build in greater flexibility to the policy, in many respects that runs counter to the concern that you've raised, which is that the policy might not actually be clear enough or prescriptive enough to be sound. The problem, sir, with flexibility, particularly in terms of other needs which might outweigh the value of an employment site, is that in an area of high housing demand like Mid-Sussex, there is always going to be an argument that there is a strong need for housing, which is more important than employment. If you go down that road, ultimately you will end up losing a large part of your valuable employment stock. That is why you need a protective policy. It's exactly why you need a protective policy. And so in our submission, the proper approach to this is the one which SA34 takes, possibly bolstered by your suggestion of criteria. Mr. North's clients would then know exactly what it is that they need to demonstrate in order to justify the release of their site. If they are able to justify that, then release will be allowed. And if they can't, then it won't, but then nor should it be. So, sir, in broad terms, the principle of the policy, I don't think Mr. North disagrees with. What he seeks is a greater degree of flexibility. We think, if anything, there might be more merit in your suggestion that the criteria need to be made clearer and more precise rather than more flexible. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. North, your hand is still up. Is that intentional?
Yes, it is, sir. Just a
Right,
very
well,
brief.
Do come in.
Point, if I may.
Yes.
Mr. Brown has asked you to look at the prospects, at least, of additional criteria. I don't think we're against that, sir. What I'm saying, sir, is this, that, and I am going to be rather personal on this particular site. The reason that we're looking at it, sir, is that this site has buildings that have been on it since the 1920s and 1930s. It was a former laundry long ago. it is badly contaminated, but that's not the main issue. So the main issue is that it doesn't meet any of the current building regulation requirements. So we've had this site costed merely to bring this up to date to modern standards, and that's not going overboard, and it certainly doesn't involve an asbestos test, it doesn't involve a fire risk test, it hasn't involved anything, but the cost of doing that is about £750,000, and the value of the site having done it is £200,000 more. It's simply not viable to do that. And so the problem in our site is that we have buildings which are literally do not meet today's standards. And whether there are businesses sometimes called bad neighbour type uses who would want to use it, we have no doubt about that. But to actually bring this up to standard, and this is the crucial point, is simply not viable. These buildings are too old. That's the main issue here. That's the issue we are having to grapple with. And if you couple that, and we've done a fair amount of work on this, so we've employed chartered building surveyors to cost the buildings out. The main building is split into 11 units of various shapes and sizes. We've costed, looked at the viability through a company who you talked about earlier today that have been involved in this inquiry. We've looked at in terms of ecology, landscape, and all the rest of it. But our fundamental issue here, sir, is that we are a site which has been allocated since 2004 for employment uses for a specific type, small 300 to 500 square metre units. At no time has an application come forward for that, sir, for the simple reason it hasn't been viable to do so. And we are registered, we've got a site here which is just going to remain until effectively it deteriorates to such an extent that you can't let the building out anyway. And we're not far from that when it comes to the EPC requirements. Thank you very much.
Mr. North, at the moment, how many people are employed on the site?
A total of 24 in all the units. That's 24 in 11 units, but there's no one unit which employs more than 4. And the occupiers of these units stretch from Hove on the Sussex coast up to Mitcham in Surrey. They're not local. In fact, there's no local Ashurst Wood users, and there's certainly no local Mid-Sussex District Council users. These people are effectively travelling from Hove or Mitcham, or in some cases East Sussex, some cases Surrey, into this site every day. It's certainly not providing a local need for the local community. What it is providing is, as Mr. Brown rightly said, we don't deny that, cheap accommodation, but not so cheap actually, because the situation is that these premises are in short supply. That I accept, but the fact is we cannot keep remaining on a site which is deteriorating. That's the issue. These buildings have been up since the 30s.
Thank you for that. Is there anything Mr. Brown wants to come in on, or shall we move on?
So can I just briefly say, I think it's very, very clear from the answer that Mr. North's just given you, that in reality, his problem with SA34 is not the policy itself. It's about the fact that his client's site is one of the sites that's been identified as protected by the policy. He talks about viability reports and so on. Well, sir, if those are there, they are the kind of evidence that would justify making an exception to the policy. But that's not a reason for tinkering with the policy itself. It might be a reason for looking at his particular site. And so, we've already had that discussion up to a point. We may have it again, I don't know. But I do say that the policy itself is sound. Secondly, Mr. North refers to allocations, the fact it's been allocated for some time and nothing yet has happened. So it's important to recognise that while SA34 is in part a policy which encourages expansion, and it may well be that what Mr. North has said about the possibility of expansion given the issues of viability. That may be true of his particular client's site, but that is only part of what SA34 does. SA34 also protects what is already there. And I simply repeat the point I've already made. It's clear that this is a site which is attractive to the market. Mr. North doesn't deny that, recognises that there is a demand, a need for sites of this particular kind. And while that is the case, it's appropriate that sites like this should be protected. Thank you, sir.
I wonder if Bart and Wilmore wish to say anything in relation to their comments, if they are here or represented. Maybe they're not. No, I don't think they are. So we'll move on in that case, and I'll look at 5.4, which is about the housing and employment balance, and how we view this. And is there a balance between housing provision and maintaining adequate supply of employment land? The council referred to the average number of jobs needed in the quota figure of 534, which is closely linked to an increase in population and provides for the appropriate homes and jobs balance. They say, interestingly, this equates to a 10 to 15 hectare deployment land requirement, and that these 7 employment sites that we're talking about now, they total 17.45 hectares. So you've got a little bit of a small oversupply, if you like, for flexibility and resilience. And I think that's quite a useful thing there. Right, what else have we got here? We've got problems from Infrastructure First in relation to what's happening in the East Grinstead area, and whether, in fact, it's out of sync. We've got Richard Barmby, again, talking about the East Grinstead, Felbridge, Crawley Down area with no additional employment space, and stating that this imbalance could be solved by removing allocations for housing at sites SA 19 and 20. I'm not sure whether he's therefore hinting, or the group is hinting, they should be filled with employment uses or just not developed at all. So those are the points I've got there. Does anybody wish to come and comment on the employment housing balance of 5.4? I'm getting no takers, so I'm assuming nobody wishes to add to what they've already written, which is fair enough. So I have to take both into consideration, of course, equally. But if there's no comments on 5.4, then I move to my final, no, it's not my final question, I've got a couple more. 5.5 talks about mixed use areas, and where is the evidence of underuse stroke closure of industrial commercial uses. Council state that there's flexibility in the plan to allow other uses where there is no prospect of continued use or the losses outweighed by benefits. My one comment there is, what about the benefit of mixed use areas in their own right? Unless I've misunderstood you, you don't seem too positive about that idea. So is there anything the council want to come back to me on 5.5 mixed uses?
Sorry, so Mr. Marsh and I are just having a brief discussion about whether he wants to come back on your last point there.
Well, I've lost everybody then after two lots of silences. Thought you'd all gone to the moon. Do come back. Do come back to me.
Yeah, no.
Thank you, sir. Just looking at some of our strategic sites, such as the Northern Arc and the like in Burgess Hill, there are some mixed-use areas on those sites. I think we were talking about SA 20 and the size of that site the other day with various different uses on there. I don't think there's anything that precludes it. I mean, SA34 is our existing sites, and I think we would just go back to existing policy DP1 and anything in the NPPF on that regard. So nothing really in addition to add there. That's certainly in the scope of the DPD in front of us, I'd say.
Fine, thank you for that. Nothing more on 5.5 then. 5.6 is about town centres, and I do understand the council's response and in relation to the district plan review, and that's the time to do it. Is there anything else the council wish to add in relation to 5.6? No? Right, okay. We're almost finished for the day. We'll come on to 5.7, which is, are there any other commercial, retail or employment policies which are needed in this plan? Or are the more strategic policies in the district plan sufficient to provide the appropriate guidance for Mid-Sussex for the remainder of the plan period? Council remind me that this plan is limited to the 4 aims set out, very clearly, I might say, and it's not within the scope of this plan to consider anything else, and therefore no further policies are immediately required. Anything anybody wishes to add in relation to 5.7? Right, okay. Charlotte, is there anything that you need to say at this time?
Sorry, I've got a unstable internet connection. I've got nothing to add at this point. No.
Well, it's the only point you're going to have today, because I'm going to say bye-bye to everybody in a few minutes.
Yes. No. The only thing I would like to say is just sorry, I've had a bad internet connection, and the only thing I wanted to say was about the action points, and then just making sure that today I will send them out to the relevant participants from the relevant sessions, and then you were giving a week, is that correct?
Correct, absolutely correct.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
So the first ones that went out that the council kindly replied to on Friday, that means that this Friday will be the deadline for AP3 and AP4.
Okay, I'll send those out today then.
Yes, was there anything else I was going to say? Probably it, I think. So we start tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning. And we're going to be looking at the environment, landscape, biodiversity and heritage in the morning, and transport infrastructure implementation monitoring in the afternoon. So I look forward to seeing those of you who are coming back tomorrow. So, right, so we'll say goodbye now.
Cheerio, sir.
Bye-bye.